Now, as we know, there are wants at the state level to try to go after laws, particularly for these nasty preachers which have been saying the mad things that they have in the past. But I offer just a small note of caution here, not because I want to give carte blanche to these people, but there are other versions of this legislation which have already been put into effect, like in Victoria, where it is an actual criminal offence to vilify, i.e. joke, about somebody's gender, sexuality. That is a jailable offence. Now, my belief is that just like good old-fashioned legal studies in Year 9, there's a difference between whether you did something or whether you meant to do something. So therefore, about whether you mean to vilify somebody or whether you are just joking, in my view, is an important thing to have a chat about here. But we know that this is a conversation that is happening in and around us. So, Michael, how do we make sure that we create laws that very obviously say that if a hate preacher is sitting up there on the Christian occasion of Good Friday, that of course is not recognised by his religion, saying the most awful things about Jews, that it's covered there, but we don't have a scenario where basically it becomes the beginnings of blasphemy laws because you go after somebody because of their religion?
So, mate, the answer is you have to work out in a Western democracy where the line is drawn between free speech and something which should be against the law. And the line needs to be drawn. On one side, you have to have the right to offend someone, to ridicule someone, to oppose someone, to abuse someone. That's got to be acceptable in a modern democracy. Once you cross the line towards inciting violence or inciting hatred, that's what we're talking about here is something which shouldn't be permitted under the law. So an Islamic preacher who says in a mosque, "Death to Jews," or "I see a Jew behind a tree," or people that yell, "Kill the Jews," if that's what they said, to me that's what they said, that crosses the line between acceptable and unacceptable speech. And the modern example of that is, as I've just mentioned, how these laws in New South Wales do not apply to these Islamic preachers is beyond me, and the extent that Min says he's going to strengthen the law, good. Incitement to violence should be illegal. Promoting violence should be illegal. But on the other hand, I haven't seen any rabbis in synagogues calling for death to Muslims in recent months. And so, Chris Minns, the eyes of the world are on you, my friend, because your state has become the hate capital of Australia, and you need to do something about it.
Because, Nicholas, my issue simply is that I agree with every word that Michael just said, and everyone who wants to do something particularly about the rise of anti-Semitism that happens right here. But when some of the legislation talks about saying things about people because of their faith, or ridiculing people because of their faith, or attacking people because of their faith, how do you not end up in a scenario where, and again, I'm not equating the same things to be true, but I'm saying this is what you have to be careful with the law, is that people dress up as nuns in the Mardi Gras each and every year. How is that not going to be deeply offensive to people of the Christian faith and Catholic faith in particular? So you've got to be very specific here with the laws, otherwise you're going to end up in a scenario where where they can be overly interpreted by judges and governments and causes a little further down the track.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think we need to acknowledge that there is some complexity in these debates, and there has to be. As Michael said, on the one hand, we all accept that free speech is the bedrock of our democracy, and that means that you have to sometimes hear things you're not going to agree with and that will offend you. On the other hand, if those statements cross a line and go into inciting hatred or violence against other people in society, then in my view, I agree with Michael. I think you're crossing a line at that point. Now, I think context is also important when judging the consequence of these words. So, you said the word joke before. Now, look, the specific carve-out in many jurisdictions where these provisions already exist that allow someone who is making statements in the context of a comedy or a stand-up comic production to say things that you wouldn't necessarily be able to say in a different context. And it also goes to, the nun walking down Oxford Street in the Mardi Gras as well. Context is important there. Obviously, the person dressed up as the nun is not trying to incite hatred against a particular church. They're doing it in a comical way, and so therefore it's allowable. Now, I understand there's grey areas here, and it does get complex. In fact, it gets messy. But I think it's important that we do try to navigate our way through these things, because hate speech is on the rise in Australia, and we do need to see governments taking a tougher stance. So I think the Minns government should be doing more, and I think these proposals in New South Wales are a good thing.
Just one last one on this, though. We have different examples of this again. Where let's take race, get into the world of gender. I mean, literally in Scotland, it is a criminal offence to misgender somebody. Now, people like J.K. Rowling openly turn around and say, well, sorry, there's only two sexes, men and women, and you can't tell me that, you can switch between, so therefore I'll call you by the name that was on your birth certificate at the time you were born, not the one that you were able to fill out later. She's made that very clear, and a preponderance, if not a majority, of young people running around our universities right now think it should be a criminal offence to misgender somebody in Australia going forward. And again, Michael, this is just my issue, right, which is that we all think that we put these laws together to stop a series of behaviours that are targeted at the people that we like by the people who we don't like because of what they target to those people. But in a country that becomes less religious, other things start to replace as holy figures, such as race, sexuality, gender, and you get what's happening right now in Scotland. So it's not me arguing about slippery slope, it's just pointing out that, these line in the sand, they change with the population.
Yeah. So one of the lessons out of The Voice, mate, is simply this. Governments ought to be aware of being intimidated by activists, the left-wing activists who are on the public payroll, students, etc., who've got plenty of time for activism, to go to demonstrations, to lobby governments. None of them are small business people or farmers, by the way. They're all the professional classes, the elites. Beware being intimidated and lobbied by these people. And this is obviously what's happened in Scotland. Of course, J.K. Rowling should be able to say, I believe there are two sexes. She's not inciting hatred, she's not inciting violence, she's expressing an opinion. An Islamic preacher, as I said, who gets up in a mosque and says death to Jews, basically, that crosses the line. That's hate speech, that's incitement to violence, that should be criminalised. But, hurting someone's feelings cannot be a criminal offence, otherwise all free speech dies in Western democracies. And one of the great strengths of our democracies is diversity of opinion, which is what you don't see in China, you don't see in North Korea, you don't see in Russia, and you don't see in Iran, you don't see in Palestine, by the way, in the West Bank or in Gaza. You don't see free speech. So that's where I draw the line. And governments who act in an extreme manner, like the Scottish government, they're going to create just a world of litigation for years to come, and it'll be very damaging to the country.
And I would argue that that's what's happening with this federal government when it comes to the attempt to introduce fines and a regulatory system around misinformation, all right? Now, clearly, lies, outright defamation, outright discrimination, all of these things are covered, all right? But I'm talking about a narrative the government doesn't like. So if the official line out of the government, Nicholas, is, we needed to take 2 jets because the Air Force said we had to take 2 jets, and anyone turning around saying, well, hang on, that shouldn't be taking place, well, that may well be if a Karen wants to go off and complain, and a whole bunch of people that are sympathetic to their employers, part of the system, they'll turn around, rule it to be misinformation, and that's a slippery slope that this government wants to send us on now. They're currently lubing up the slide.
Well, look, again, I agree it's complex. There is a slippery slope there. 5 years ago, I probably would have agreed with you on this, Paul. But now through modern media and social media and digital platforms, there are these parallel universes that exist where blatant misinformation is being used to divide society, cause great social harm. And we need to have some sort of response to that, and I agree it's not easy to make these laws, but I think we need to have a go at it. As for J.K. Rowling, look, I think she's a brilliant author. I've read all of her books, so have my kids. Much joy to be found there, but I don't think she's a great legal mind, and I don't think she really understands these hate laws in Scotland. Again, context is important. If you say these things, it has to be with the intention of being abusive and spreading hate, and clearly someone having a lark or using, saying something not particularly nice in the context of a comedic performance is not going to bring you into breach of these laws. Now, she's a gender-critical feminist.
Your joke is vilification. That's the point of the laws running out of control. And that's where I think we're beginning to head. And we know that what is reasonable offence and a common standard of offence has now completely changed to what the activists seek to define as a certain form of offence, which is emblematic by the person who seeks to say they are offended as if it was a decree on their life or their safety because there's a joke or even a comment about whether there are two genders.